In 1324, one man distributed so much gold on a single journey that he destroyed Cairo's economy for 12 years. It wasn't a war, it wasn't an invasion, it wasn't a natural disaster. It was generosity, the most expensive generosity in the history of humanity. And the man who practiced it was so rich he didn't even realize what he had done. To understand what happened in 1324, you first need to understand who Mansa Musa was and the empire he governed. Mali in the early 14th century was one of the largest political structures in the world, a territory the size of Western Europe. 40 to 50 million inhabitants, more than all of Europe at the time, still recovering from the Black Death. Absolute control over the gold and salt trade routes that fed the Mediterranean economy. The gold mines of Bambouk and Bure produced more than half the gold circulating in the medieval world. Between the 8th and 14th centuries, West Africa supplied 2/3 of all the world's gold, 2/3, when Venetian merchants weighed gold in their markets, when popes financed crusades, when European kings paid their armies. That gold came largely from Mali, from Mansa Musa's empire. He was, in current values, the richest man who ever existed. Estimates reach $400 billion, more than all modern billionaires combined. And he was also, and this is fundamental to understanding what happened in 1324, a deeply religious man, a devout Muslim who prayed 5 times a day, who fasted during Ramadan, who considered the pilgrimage to Mecca not an option, but a sacred obligation. The problem was the scale. Because when the richest man in history decides to make a religious pilgrimage, what happens is not a journey. It is an event that shakes the world. The preparation took years. Mansa Musa was not going to make a discreet pilgrimage. He was going to make a declaration to the Islamic world. A declaration of who Mali was, what it represented, of the wealth and power of an empire that many in the Arab world knew only through merchant rumors. What he assembled is almost impossible to visualize today. 60,000 people in the caravan. Not just soldiers and servants of a complete court. Physicians, scribes, theology teachers, poets, musicians, architects, cooks, merchants of all kinds. 12,000 slaves, each dressed in silk and brocade, each carrying a 4-kilogram gold bar, not as cargo, as a demonstration of wealth. 80 camels, each transporting between 100 and 135 kilograms of gold dust. 500 handmaids of Mansa Musa's own wife, Inari Kunate, who was also making the pilgrimage, traveling in luxury that would have scandalized the European courts of the time. Horses with gold bridles, silk tents, mobile kitchens that prepared nocturnal feasts in the middle of the desert, and one absolute rule. Any person who asked the emperor for alms received gold. Any village the caravan passed through received gifts. Any mosque along the route received a donation for construction and maintenance. Generosity had no limit, because the gold seemed to have no limit. Think about the logistics of this. 60,000 people need to eat, drink, sleep, move, in a desert that killed the unprepared with brutal efficiency. The field kitchens worked before dawn. Water carriers moved through the caravan with leather gourds. Physicians treated the inevitable cases of heat stroke, infection, injuries. The animals needed pasture and water at calculated points along the route. Horses were more demanding than camels, and there were hundreds of horses. The caravan passed through Timbuktu, through Gao, through Tagaza, the salt mines in the heart of the desert, where workers lived in houses made of salt blocks because it was the only material available for kilometers around. At each stop, Mansa Musa built. He financed repairs to mosques. He paid theology teachers to teach in the communities he passed through. It was not just a pilgrimage, it was a royal tour through the Islamic world, and it arrived in Egypt. The Sultan of Egypt, Al-Nasir Muhammad, sent representatives to receive Mansa Musa with imperial honors. Protocol required that Mansa Musa prostrate himself before the Sultan, a sign of respect and submission. Mansa Musa refused, not out of arrogance, out of religious principle. As a devout Muslim, he only prostrated before God, not before any man, and whether the Sultan of Egypt or anyone else. There were delicate diplomatic negotiations. Finally, they reached a compromise. Mansa Musa would bow rather than prostrate. And when they finally met, what Mansa Musa did next initiated one of the greatest economic crises in the medieval world. He began to distribute gold, not in a calculated way, not in a strategic way, in an absolutely casual way, as if gold were infinite, as if wealth were not a limited resource but a permanent state of being. He gave gold to members of the Egyptian court. He gave gold to officials who accompanied him to market. He gave gold to beggars in the streets. When someone performed a service, any service, they received gold as payment. When he visited markets, and he visited many, with the genuine curiosity of a man who wanted to know the world, he paid for everything with gold and left as change the equivalent of what he paid. In the mosques he visited in every Egyptian city he crossed, he donated gold for construction and maintenance in quantities that left religious administrators astonished. The problem is that the medieval economy depended on the scarcity of precious metals to function. Gold was valuable because there was little of it. When there was little, the price held. When there was little, commercial contracts had stable value. When there was little, savings in gold were worth something. Mansa Musa introduced so much gold at once that the market could not absorb it. The price of gold in Cairo fell 25% during his visit. 25%. Everyone who had savings in gold lost a quarter of their value overnight. Every commercial contract denominated in gold was immediately unbalanced. The entire economy entered instability, and it didn't recover quickly. 12 years later, historians were still documenting the effects of Mansa Musa's visit on the regional economy. 12 years of economic disruption, caused by a single visit, by a single man who was simply too rich to understand what he was doing. The historian Al-Makrizi, writing decades later, documented the phenomenon with an astonishment that you can still feel through the centuries. This man flooded Cairo with his generosity. There was no court official, no office holder, who had not received gold from his hands. Prices rose to such an extent that even today merchants suffer the consequences. One man, one journey, and the economy of 3 continents was never the same. After completing the Hajj in Mecca, with the same pomp that characterized the entire journey, Mansa Musa returned to Mali. But he didn't return alone. He brought people. Specifically, he brought Abu Ishaq Ibrahim al-Sahili, a poet and architect from Granada in southern Spain, a cultured, sophisticated man with knowledge of architecture that was rare in West Africa. Mansa Musa convinced him to return with him to Mali. With what argument? With 200 kilograms of gold as an advance payment. And al-Sahili transformed the architecture of the entire Sahel. The mosques he built in Timbuktu, including the Jingwereber Mosque, built in 1327, still exist today, still function. 700 years after the man who commissioned them. But the most important thing Mansa Musa brought back was not an architect, it was fame. News of his journey spread throughout the Islamic world. It reached Europe through the merchants operating in Cairo. In 1375, 50 years after the pilgrimage, a Jewish cartographer from Majorca named Abraham Cresques drew the most advanced medieval map of the world, the Catalan Atlas. And at the center of that map, in the heart of West Africa, there is a figure, a king seated on a golden throne, holding in one hand a nugget of gold the size of a melon. The caption says, "Musa Mali, Lord of the Blacks of Guinea, whose country is so rich in gold that he is the richest and most noble lord of this part of the world." Mansa Musa, on the most important map of the 14th century, recognized by European cartographers who had never seen him, as the richest man in the world. That fame reached the ears of Portuguese kings, and it was part of the motivation that led Prince Henry the Navigator to finance expeditions along the African coast in the 15th century. The Portuguese wanted to reach the source of African gold directly without going through Islamic intermediaries. In a sense, the Age of Discovery was motivated in part by the memory of Mansa Musa. The fame of an African emperor inspired the expeditions that would circumnavigate the world. It is one of history's greatest ironies. European exploration of Africa began as an attempt to reach African wealth, and ended up destroying the civilizations it wanted to find. But what did this man do with all that wealth before the empire entered its decline? What did he build? What did he leave for the world beyond a legendary pilgrimage? The answer lies in a city that today seems forgotten in the desert, but which was for centuries the intellectual center of an entire continent. That in the next episode.